As a child, I believed a God existed because that's what I was told at school. I mean, in the same way, I believed that Queen Elizabeth existed and Henry VIII existed and the pharaohs existed. When you're a child, you believe what adults tell you. And only a little bit later did I start questioning. One of the first things that happened was when I was discussing with my mother the fact that there are lots of different religions, and I realized that they couldn't all be right, and so there was no reason at all why the Christian religion in which I happened to have been brought up was any more likely to be right than any other. But then I suppose I've drifted into a kind of vague deism, where I sort of thought, well, there must be something to explain all this wonderful organization and the beauty of life. And it was only then, when I learned about Darwinian evolution, first from my father and later at school, that I realized that actually that has a very good explanation, a very good natural explanation, which is much simpler, more parsimonious, obviously true, and that finally booted out all thoughts of God from my mind. At the age of about 6, I suppose, I do remember telling my younger sister, who was 3, about the planets and telling her what they were all called and what order they were spaced out from the sun, that kind of thing. So I think I was intrigued and inspired by the idea of outer space, which I think probably a lot of children are. I never had a telescope. I've got a telescope now, but it's rather hard to use because there's too much light pollution in Oxford, and there's also too much cloud. But no, not as a child. My father did have an old microscope, and we would get pond water and look down the microscope at the teeming little creatures, little crustaceans and hydra, little tiny water fleas. And so I had my eyes opened by that microscope to the fact that there's a world of tiny creatures that you can't see with the naked eye. But it's like looking at an African safari park, but in miniature, through the lens of a microscope. I became much more interested in biology after I got to Oxford. I became inspired not so much by the natural history as by the deep questions that it could answer. Why are we here? What's the nature of existence? What's it all about? What's the purpose of life? It was that really, really fired my enthusiasm. I didn't read The Origin of Species until long after I was a strong advocate of what it said. And so, in a way, it didn't hit me like a thunderbolt because I sort of was already there. What it did, though, was impress me with what an immensely learned man Darwin was and what an immensely sincere man he was. You have to admire the dogged stubbornness, the determination that he has to get the message across using examples, using illustrations, using metaphors, using the power of language to be worthy of this tremendous idea that he had had. I make a special point when I go on lecture tours of going to the so-called Bible Belt. And I tend not to think it's worth bothering with places like San Francisco and New York because you've got that sort of less of a challenge. But I like going to places like Georgia and Alabama and Arkansas and Oklahoma. And I get huge audiences, very enthusiastic. I get standing ovations, and I feel, as I watch them stand up, that what's really happening is that they're looking at each other and realizing, all these people, I'm not alone. And so I take enormous encouragement from that. There are far, far more religious non-believers than anybody realizes in the United States. It just takes a little bit of a heave for more people to come out of the closet, and suddenly thousands more will come out of the closet. You don't learn science in order to go into the lab and use a Bunsen burner and a test tube and a microscope. Everybody should know some science because it is fascinating. I mean, the fact that we know where we come from, why we exist, what our ancestors looked like, when they came into existence, when the universe came into existence, when the world came into existence, what it is that shaped the world you live in, what it is that has shaped over 4 billion years your ancestors and the ancestors of every other creature alive today to make them what they are today. What could be more rivetingly exciting than understanding that? And we, in the 21st century, are privileged to do that in a way that our ancestors just 1 century ago, 2 centuries ago, were not. So whatever your profession is, if you're a stockbroker or a banker or a bus driver or a surfing instructor, whatever it is, you're not a whole person unless you read enough science, look at science documentaries to understand why you exist in the first place.